So here we go. Uh, Welcome to everyone who is on the line, and as others come, they'll jump right in. Um, Sources of Strength got its start up in North Dakota with Mark Lemuri, our founder and director. For about 15 years, was working as a civilian director of the Bismarck Youth Bureau, which did a lot of crisis response, and as a result, they got called out to about 1,000 plus crisis calls each year. And over the course of about 3 years, as he was doing that work, he ended up attending about 30 teen funerals, about half being substance abuse related deaths and about half being suicide related deaths. And at a time when North Dakota had some of the highest suicide rates in the country, they had about double the national average for teen suicides. And Mark, in that work that he was doing, really started to feel we needed to get in front of all this, that there's got to be some way we can shift from just responding to crisis and intervening towards having a comprehensive way of preventing the onset of suicidal high risk amongst youth and suicide deaths. So he started to develop sources of strength really based on the model of upstream prevention. And if you're not familiar with this story, we like to tell a parable of a river that runs through a valley, and there's a village alongside the river right near where the river goes over a waterfall. And every day there's a woman who takes her daily walk along the river's edge, and as she's walking one day, she hears a young person caught up in the stream about to go over the waterfall, and so she jumps into action and swims out in the river and grabs the young person, pulls them back to shore, and performs CPR and saves a life. And everyone celebrates this heroic event, but day after day, as she takes her daily walk along the river's edge, there's more and more young people caught up in the stream about to go over the waterfall. So the whole village kicks into action, and they train lifeguards, and they build watchtowers, and they have a lot of surveillance methods there, and they're able to save a lot of young people from going over the waterfall. They're just not able to save everyone, and so burdened by this reality, the woman starts to walk upstream, and they say, "Hey, where are you going? We need all hands on deck. We're trying to deal with this crisis. You know, we can identify some, but others we miss because it's nighttime or they're under the surface of the water." And so this woman says, "I'm going upstream to see if I can't prevent some young people from falling in the river in the first place, or can we take some of our efforts down here at the waterfall's edge and move them further upstream? Build some protective factors around, some fences around the river, or can we have more adults hanging out on the river's edge further upstream to grab young people as they come by, or can we in fact train young people themselves so that when they do fall in the river, they can swim to the shore and get out themselves while the water's still relatively tranquil before they reach that waterfall moment? Or can we give them the skills that they don't get so close to the river's edge and don't fall in the first place?" And that's really what we mean by upstream prevention. That source of strength primary mission is to move as far upstream as possible, to build protective factors, develop resiliency and coping mechanisms, trust towards adult, break down codes of secrecy and silence, and develop help-seeking or early help-seeking pathways amongst youth. That's our primary mission. At a secondary level, at that waterfall moment, in that intervention space, and that's largely where most suicide prevention takes place, even though we call it prevention. The dominant model for suicide prevention, that gatekeeper training of those lifeguards, that identifying risk factors and warning signs and trying to plug young people into the proper mental health referral process. That's incredibly important work, and we need more of it, but we just really feel that that's not enough. But at that level, source of strength does have a secondary benefit of peer leaders are 4 times more likely to refer a suicidal friend to a trusted adult. And so we see them acting as connectors to help in that intervention space, and then going back to agents of social change, moving far upstream to change climate and culture. Just real quickly, at that postvention space below the waterfall, in the event of a death or a loss of a student, we do mobilize our peer leaders. We draw them together. How are you all doing? How are your fellow students doing? And now is the time we really need to be out there tapping into strength and cultivating spaces for our community to participate in strength and tell their story of strength, because we know that effective postvention is really effective prevention. And so we try to involve our peer leaders at every level. And that picture just gives you a snapshot of who we are as Source of Strength, where our primary focus is, as well as trying to have an impact in those multiple areas. Another really helpful image we like to talk about is Mark was developing the program in North Dakota, and really still today, we have identified some key gaps in the prevention space that we really feel Source of Strength brings a unique solution to filling those gaps. And I think it's helpful as you all come on board to really see the way that we fill these gaps. So, bridging the gap between the young people who we're trying to serve and effective prevention programming that can really bridge that river for them. So the first one really is related to what I was talking about just a moment ago, in that a lot of suicide prevention remains primarily risk-focused. And while it's definitely important to educate people on risk factors and warning signs, we feel that a limited approach on just risk and warning signs is a gap in a couple of different ways. One, when we talk to young people, often they already know many of the risk factors and warning signs. They might miss, aggressive impulsivity, or they might miss some of those trauma pieces. But if you ask them, they can usually rattle off a pretty thorough list. But if you ask them, how do people get better? How do they get through that? How do they overcome feeling suicidal or any other issue they might face? You usually get a shoulder shrug and maybe talk to a counselor. And we really feel that there needs to be more of a dialogue around what it looks like to get better, to recover, to overcome challenges. And so we take a strength-focused approach that benefits those at risk, but also is wider in terms of its capacity, and really focuses on the fact that young people are not just at risk. They also have strengths and assets in their lives. And if we take a strength-focused approach, we can also benefit a wider portion of the population, not just those individuals who are at risk, but we can also benefit students who may never be at risk for suicide, but they're struggling to manage conflict at home or stress in relationships at school or getting into the college of their choice. And so we are able to have an impact not only those who are at risk, but also the wider population. The second major gap that we see is that a lot of prevention is sad, shock, and trauma focused. That it uses sad colors and messaging and shocking statistics and traumatic death stories. And while that might be effective with a portion of the population, it's usually amongst those who are already feeling strong and resilient. And amongst our most vulnerable populations of a school or community, we can actually do harm, either having no impact or worse off, they walk away feeling less likely to seek help or more traumatized or triggered by that kinds of messaging. And so we take a hope, help, strength-based approach that says, how do we give people hope that the problems of today are temporary, they can get through them, they can get better? How do we tap them into formal and informal helping resources? And how do we cultivate a language around strength, the strengths that they have and that they have around them? A good example of this shift is currently everybody's kind of dealing with how to talk to their students about the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why as a good example of sad, shock, and trauma kind of messaging. And while they have the best of intentions to start a conversation, they haven't thought about the unperceived consequence that they could actually have on individuals by doing sad, shock, trauma-focused storytelling. And so, if any of you have heard, there's a school, not a Source of Strength school, but that flipped that and did messaging around 13 Reasons Why Not, and had stories each week around students who'd been through something significant and why they're still holding on to life and how they've gotten through that and the strengths they've used and the people around them that have been supports for them. So that's another big gap that we feel. The third one is that a lot of prevention remains pretty adult-driven. Adults being trained and doing this work for and on behalf of young people. And we do know from research that adults are great knowledge transfers, that they can communicate and educate, but they're not great at setting norms and behaviors amongst youth, and that peer-to-peer modeling and behavior is much more effective. And so we really need to have a peer-led component if we're going to have effective prevention strategies in schools and communities. So those are three of the ways that Source of Strength is really bridging the gaps in prevention, and part of what makes us unique. Then to just lay out the basic model for those of you who are new to this, Source of Strength is designed to bring together a group of supportive adult advisors who are caring, connected, and positive. Those are kind of the three characteristics that we've identified. We've had some caring, connected, and cynical adults be part of the program before, and we really feel that that positivity piece is important, that sometimes there can be stop and go with peer leaders and young people, and we need to be able to rise above that, maintain a positive energy, and cast a vision for sustainability, in which this isn't something that happens overnight. We chip away at it year after year as we build healthy climate and culture around help seeking and around wellness. So bringing together a group of adult advisors, those adults can be from across the school system, and I'll describe that in a later slide here. Teaming them up with a diverse group of peer leaders who have influence and sway with their friendship group. So that might be some of your typical leadership style students, but also some of your edgier students who don't typically get picked for a leadership program like this. We want them on board as well. So if you think about that diversity in terms of race, religion, and ethnicity, yes, gender and sexual orientation, yes, but also every different kind of social group or category or tribe of students we want on board, so that we can reach the widest population of a social network of a school. We really feel that the two of those teams partnered together has the most prevention power, that one without the other lacks that power. If we just train adults, we'll never be able to break through the codes of secrecy and silence that exist and have the kind of impact we're looking amongst young people. Likewise, if we just train peer leaders, we might negatively reinforce the fact that adults can't be trusted, or we don't need them, we can do this on our own. And so the two together to really carry out safe messaging. We do a training for both of them, and the Idaho Lives project will offer that training for you all. That's really fun, engaging, dynamic games, conversation, art, and then some strategic planning. And we have a whole host of strategic messaging campaigns that are templated on our website and in materials that you all will receive. And we have 3 new ones coming out in this fall to be pulled off the shelf, and then your peer leaders contextualize those, make them look a particular way that'll have the most impact with your students, that every school and community is different. And those are really designed to be campaigns that are engaging, interactive, and apply strength to our own lives. So moving away from passive kinds of messaging and more towards engaging messaging where we're telling our own story and inviting people to tell their story. And I'll describe some of those in just a little bit. But all of this to really have the power to impact positive culture, climate change, improving the environment of our school, and overall wellness to prevent suicide, amongst other concerns that young people might face. And we do that through the model of positive social norming. And if that's a new term to you, what I mean by that is a lot of prevention is actually negative social norming, in terms of if we're trying to prevent a particular behavior, we talk a lot about that behavior, which usually is in the minority of a population that's actually engaged in that behavior. So say we're trying to prevent smoking, and Judy, who's on the call, has told me she once saw a poster in a school that said 18% of high school seniors smoke cigarettes. And one, that can make you feel like, wow, that's a lot of people. It's more than I thought. But 2, it shows no attention for the 82% that don't smoke cigarettes. And why do they never get any attention when we're doing these kinds of prevention messaging, and particularly around suicide prevention? The sad, shocking, traumatic kinds of statistics get all the attention, when the reality is that's a minority of people, a small minority. It's far too many. We want to prevent every death if possible. But the vast majority who've ever felt suicidal, or attempted suicide have gotten better. They don't go on to die by suicide. It's a very curable, a very curable thing, suicidality and feeling suicidal. But we need to talk about how people get better, how they get through it, and spend most of our attention on on the positive social norming piece, so spreading that across the social network. So, we focus most of our messaging around these 8 strengths around the wheel, and at its core, Source of Strength is a storytelling process where through lots of different mediums, whether it's classroom presentations or wall displays or videos or social media, we are cultivating spaces for students and adults to tell their stories of strength. And underneath some of the visual messaging stuff that we do is what we're learning from the emerging science of social networking theory. And so I've just got a real simple 5th grade social network up here for you all to highlight some of the aspects of the way we use this and how things spread through a social network. And for a long time, the Center for Disease Control has been studying the way that illness or disease spreads through a social network. And we know that where you exist really matters. So if I had Ebola right now, you all would be happy that we're on a webinar and not in the same room, because whoever I come in contact with would be at higher risk of contracting that disease, or even the flu or a cold can spread through a social network fairly rapidly. We've known that for a long time. We're now studying the way that other norms and behaviors can spread through a social network. So things like smoking behaviors can spread from one person to another, and only fact to the 4th degree of separation for me. So if I'm a smoker, my friends are at higher risk, my friends' friends are at higher risk, my friends' friends' friends are at higher risk, and only the 4th degree of separation is someone no longer impacted by my smoking behavior. And so what we're learning from this is that it's kind of confounding our rugged individualistic mentality as Americans, that we create our own lives and make our own decisions, when in reality much of the way we behave and act is set and guided by norms that have become contagious through our social network, and we're impacted by our network, but we also have the capacity to impact our network. And so Source of Strength wants to flip that on its head to say, positive norms and behaviors can also spread through networks. How do we measure that? How do we capitalize on that and think strategically about it? So things like altruism and generosity and strength and protective factors and trust towards adults and early help-seeking behaviors can spread through a network. Resilience can spread. Hope can be contagious. And so we really view peer leaders within each network of a school as patient zero of an epidemic of health or a contagion of strength, that they go out after being trained and infect their social network with positive norms and behaviors, so that hope becomes contagious and people can really tap into strength when they go through adversity, which inevitably will come, but we can overcome it by tapping into those strengths. So just to highlight some of the people in this social network as you all think about recruiting peer leaders, these bridge students who are there in the middle are often really great peer leaders. In this social network, we got the boys all on one side and the girls all on the other side. And you have that one Don Juan bridge student in the middle who has a relationship with 2 girls on the other side of the classroom. And those bridge students are really key. In this analogy here with this slide, if we didn't have that bridge student, we wouldn't be able to impact both the boys and the girls simultaneously. So there's a connection where the bridge students can move between multiple different groups, sit at different lunch tables in the lunchroom. They're on student council, but maybe also with band kids and the video kids and the Comic-Con kids and the popular kids. They can move easily between groups. So we need some of those bridge students. These more central members with lots of different friends at the dense center of a social network, they're often your more popular students, and they might be resistant as early adopters of this kind of concept, mainly because they become the maintainers of the status quo, that things are working good for them. But once they do come on board, either they're already bought into social change initiatives or making an impact, or over time we bring them on board with that, they can be really effective in spreading norms and behaviors within the center of a social network because they have a lot of social capital with lots of different people. Moving on, more peripheral students who might have a few friends on the edge of a social network, they're really key because they're oftentimes the only people that can reach into those parts of the social network. We need them on board. And then the student down here that's listed named as an isolate in our research is someone who, when asked who their 5 closest friends were, named no one, and no one named them. And so they're isolated from the rest of the social network. And we actually just got a correction for Judy and Jennifer from the research team that on average in our high schools, 40 different high schools, as part of our larger randomized control trial, the isolate number is about 2 to 3% in high schools. And so we're really concerned about connecting those isolated students up. Not that they might be at higher risk for suicide, but they're often at higher risk for other issues that can kind of trigger suicidality, things like bullying and harassment, because they are more isolated from the social network. And so to switch over here to, this is an actual high school from our study, more complicated slide, but what I want to say here is we're measuring, each dot is an individual student. The lines are the names of friends that they've named, so they're connected to the other dots. And the size of the dot represents, so I might have 5 friends and still be a relatively small dot, but if all my 5 friends are connected back to each other, the dot gets bigger. So that represents the local network density in terms of how close-knit friendship groups are. Then the red is suicide, students who said they had a suicide attempt in the past 12 months. Yellow is they said they had suicidal thoughts in the last 12 months. And as you can see, over here on the right-hand side, we have a clustering together of individuals who have not only said they've been suicidal or attempted suicide, but they also have friends who have attempted suicide, and that's represented by the darker color in the dot. And so one of the things we're concerned about is if we just recruit a peer leader team from the center of a social network that's pretty healthy and connected, we're not going to be able to reach into that friendship group over on the other side. So if we just start with all our leadership students, we won't have an impact, particularly in that most vulnerable part of the social network. And likewise, if we only recruited from that part of the social network, we might unintentionally spread unhealthy norms and behaviors across the rest of the social network. And so we really do need peer leaders from across the social network of a school to be able to have the widest spread and impact within that network. You know, to switch over here to showing you a slide, those same students, when asked had they sought help from a trusted adult, this slide represents those students who sought help. So the darker the green color means they had not only sought help, but they had friends who sought help from adults. And so that highlighted A section of the network, where we had only one student who said they'd been feeling suicidal, had thoughts of suicide, there we see high levels of trust towards adults. They've sought help from adults, and they have other friends who have sought help from adults. Whereas down in the B highlighted section, where we had more students saying they had attempted suicide, we see lower levels of trust towards adults and lower levels of shared ties to adults. And so one of the things we've learned from the study of this in our research trials is that not only is it significantly protective to have a trusted adult, meaning we see lower rates of suicide attempts amongst individuals who have adults they could seek help from, but we also see an added level of protection amongst friendship groups that have shared ties to adults. So if I have an adult who I can go to, and then my best friend has that same adult, that's an added level of protection. And so Source of Strength is really designed not only to build trusted adult ties, but how do we cultivate shared ties within friendship groups as added level of protection. So, you know, for those of you who are more engaged in terms of the data side of this, Source of Strength has done some pretty rigorous randomized control trials. The first of its kind, the 3-year randomized control trial that we did with the University of Rochester. Is somebody trying to jump in there?
Dan, Judy didn't realize we were unmuted, but I unmuted because I have one school saying they are trying to join, but the phone number wasn't working. And so I tried the phone number, and it says you are the first participant on the call. Please hold. And Dawn is on via phone. I just wonder if if he had a different experience, a different number?
Do you want me to tell you the phone number that I used?
That would be great.
Sure. It's 646-558-8656.
Okay, and then did you have a PIN?
Yes, and then the access number was 144-613-157, followed by the pound sign. And then they gave me a 2-digit ID number that was 45 pound.
144-613. That's interesting. Okay, I had a different number. I don't know. All righty. Well, thank you.
Jennifer, I'll send that number. I just sent that number in another email to you if you want to pass that along. I apologize for.
Great. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. So moving right along, we want to make sure everybody who's trying to get on the call can. The first 3-year randomized control trial that we ran amongst the peer leader team showed these outcomes. I'll just, for brevity's sake, highlight real quickly an increase in healthy coping attitudes on average amongst the peer leader team, a +1 connection to trusted adults throughout the 2-year process. They were 4 times more likely to refer a friend to a trusted adult who may be suicidal, and they saw the largest gains amongst the least connected or the peer leaders with the most unhealthy norms or behaviors coming into the peer leader team. So there really was a sense of a rising tide lifts all boats. Amongst the wider school population, we saw increased help-seeking acceptability, increased perceptions that adults could be helpful for a suicidal peer. We saw the largest gains among students with a history of suicide attempts. So that targeted population, which is no small feat, because under the light of research, other programs have actually showed a negative impact on students with a history of suicide attempts. And so I can provide you all with journal article from the American Journal of Public Health on that initial 3-year randomized control trial. We also are engaged in a number of other ongoing research efforts. We're currently at the end of the data collection piece of a 6-year randomized control trial. And for the next 3 years, we'll probably have publications coming out and data being analyzed on that. And that's that national peer leadership study conducted primarily by the researcher, Dr. Peter Weinman in the University of Rochester. We're working on a number of other studies you can see here on this slide, both in Canada, US, and Australia. And I'll just quickly highlight in Colorado here, we're working on a sexual violence prevention study funded by the Center for Disease Control. And that study will be measuring the impact of source to strength not only on suicide and suicide prevention markers, but also on sexual violence prevention outcomes, as well as bully harassment prevention outcomes. And so really testing the theory that these many issues or concerns that young people face are really interconnected, both in their risks and interconnected in their protective factors. And while siloed funding and also programming have prevented us from implementing programs that really impact all of these issues, Source of Strength is designed to have an impact on multiple forms of violence, multiple concerns that young people face, not only suicide, but also substance abuse, violence, bullying, harassment, sexual violence, as well as other mental health concerns. We're an evidence-based suicide prevention program, and this study is really the first of its kind to test that theory to see the impact we might have on multiple issues. So with that being kind of a broad overview, let's spend some time then talking about kind of next steps for implementing Source of Strength, and then we'll close out with a couple examples of the kinds of different activities peer leaders do, and then open it up for questions, concerns. So starting off to get buy-in for Source of Strength, I think you all are already on board. So some of this, this first slide will just be to reiterate the process, getting some stakeholder buy-in from key leaders and administration in your school. We're in this educate phase right now, just some initial philosophy and examples of of whatnot as you prepare. We ask that schools do some kind of protocol review where you take a look at the way we handle distressed or suicidal students before implementing the program, that you know that's in place. And I know that Idaho Lives Project will help you all with that if you feel like you need it. And then recruiting adults to be part of the program. And that adult recruitment process, if you haven't already started it, we recommend a 1 to 10 ratio of adults to peer leaders. If you feel like you're in a higher trauma school or low levels of connectedness to adults from the students, maybe a 1 to 7 ratio. And that adult team can be a variety of individuals, administrators, counselors, teachers, other staff members, resource officers, food service, librarians, transportation staff. Really looking for a diversity on that team. You know, also gender, thinking about that, male and female staff and adults, so that we can have them represented on the team. The time requirements, at least in the initial trainings for adults, is 3 to 6 hours. Peer leaders is 4 to 6 hours. And Idaho Lives Project will offer that training for you all. And then going forward, we recommend a 1-hour meeting twice a month where your team gets together and does one part fun, one part sharing, one part planning, and carries out activities over the course of the school year. In terms of time requirements, there might be a potential hour or two thrown in there every month where you're helping the peer leaders carry out some of their activities, depending on how big they go. And we ask that those adults be volunteered, not voluntold, that they're not just assigned, but they have some passion that they bring to this. Talking about recruitment for your peer leaders, the typical model is, and we have documents for you and letters that can go with this, is that you nominate that diversity of students with influence, thinking about race, ethnicity, religion, thinking about gender, sexual orientation, social groups, thinking male and female. Particularly as we start this sexual violence prevention, it's brought new insight to us that we really need to push schools to think about gender diversity and these other forms of diversity, but it's important in the sense if we're going to hack away at sexual violence and dating violence in schools, we really need, some, which happens to be often perpetrated more prevalently from male students, that we need to have them on board if we're going to have a culture change amongst that population. And likewise, we need that diversity in the adult team to really keep peer leaders engaged. So the process is handing out nominations forms to staff, helping them see that kind of diversity that we're looking for, getting them to nominate students they think would be good for the program. Then we invite them, send out invitations, and usually hold some kind of informal meeting where those students come, pitch them on the leadership side of the program. Doesn't mean we avoid saying suicide prevention, but heavy on the fact that you all were identified as key influencers in the school, people with leadership qualities. We want you to be part of this social change program, leadership program, and then send them home with nomination forms, with parent permission forms after we've pitched. And we're looking for about a 10% of the student population. If you're in a large school, maybe that's a 3-year goal, but we recommend shooting for 10%. The best training itself is about 60. If we go larger than that, the Idaho Lives Project might talk to you, but about what they would need to make that possible, or splitting them into 2 groups, but looking for about 10% of the population. And that's not an abstract number. We found through our research that once you drop below 10%, particularly in a larger school, you see a drop in saturation in terms of more students have never heard about sources, they've never interacted or applied strength to their life, and they're further away from peer leaders. So there's a higher percentage of the school that is 3 or 4 steps away from a peer leader as a friend, as opposed to once you get to that 10%, there's a higher percentage that are 1 to 2 degrees of separation from a peer leader. So that spread can happen more easily. And then we train those peer leaders together with the adults for 4 to 6 hours and get them set up to start carrying out activities throughout the year. Then if you're going to think about the cycle, this is really designed to be a multi-year process that we do 1 year, and then we have a kind of a repeat of year 2, year 3, really long-term systemic culture and climate change. So if you were to break this into that cycle, it's do some buy-in, recruit, it's offer that training for those teams, then do messaging phase of meeting within 10 days of when the training happens, meeting twice a month, carrying out 5 to 6 messaging campaigns per year, and then at the end of the year to celebrate what they've done, to evaluate in some way what they've done, and to then share those successes out to other individuals, to the school, to the community, up, to your administrator, out to the district, to board members, to civic groups, because oftentimes our peer leader teams are probably the most engaged and active prevention specialists in a community, and doing it on a kind of a shoestring budget compared to maybe some other initiatives. And then we regroup, retrain, and recruit for the new year, as that being kind of the cycle and building on each year's successes. And then, just in terms of philosophy, as I move towards sharing some examples, as peer leaders go out to do this messaging, the key being hope, help, strength, not sad, shock, trauma, that they want to keep it safe, they want to keep it effective, keep it hopeful. And this might be difficult at first because a lot of our culture and society focuses on sad, shock, trauma, whether it's politics or the media. Our brains kind of gravitate towards that, and we want to really encourage and shift the tide towards hope, help, strength. And then, another key lens is that we're not asking peer leaders to be junior psychologists or peer counselors, that we're asking them to be agents of social change and connectors to help, to keep their role really safe and effective. So we have a whole host of templated campaigns on our website that teams can just choose from, pull off the shelf, and contextualize. And they look a lot like this. So here's some examples of trusted adults campaigns where, in the peer leader training, we get individuals to name trusted adults. We go around the circle, they write that person's name down, and then they say that person's name out loud, and they go to that person after the training to give them that card. And that simple act of naming a trusted adult and traveling that pathway to the trusted adult is essentially a dry run of a help-seeking pathway. The more we can get them to do that and seek help even when not in crisis, the more that becomes second nature, and they do that in the event. They're much more likely to do that in the event of a crisis. And so then we might get the team to start planning, how can we break out and do this with 70-80% of the student body, get them to name trusted adults and create a giant wall display. And that wall display really has that positive social norming piece, that if I'm a student who walks into a school feeling like I'm not connected and I don't trust adults and no one else does, why would teenagers trust adults? And I have to walk past a wall with hundreds of names of my peers that have been naming trusted adults. You can really break that down. And actually, a lot of the students at this school trust adults, and maybe over time, at least at first, that actually the majority of students in the school trust adults, and maybe over time, I can also start to trust them, or I pull a name off the wall, or through other activities, I'm given the space to actually engage. So lots of different examples of that. We got a thankfulness challenge where students are just practicing gratitude for 21 days that can actually map the chemical makeup of our brain and the way that we perceive the world. Lots of different fun activities in terms of engaging their community through parade floats and wall displays and photo booths. And all of that to say that social strength activities are tapping into positive youth culture. What's fun, what's engaging, how do we celebrate our strength? Suicide prevention doesn't always have to be down and depressing. It can actually look like just celebrating life. The slides you see in front of you here is pictures from a Colorado school here that started to break up social strength into one strength a month. And they got all the students to name a family support. And on a piece of paper, creating a chain link. And even students who felt like, nope, nobody in my family plays that role, they had an adult advisor and a peer leader there to write that student's name down and say, hey, you're part of our school family. We want to tie you in, that we want to be here for you in the way your family hasn't been. And so then they created this family support chain that stretched through the entire school hallway, really wrapping everyone in that family support. And so they do one big visual thing alongside multiple other, classroom presentations or a video or a social media campaign. So lots of different ways that these campaigns can be run. But with that said, I want to leave our last 13 minutes or so open for questions, comments. So if you want to unmute your either your phone or your computer, and we'll try to facilitate some responses to any questions that you all might have. All right, so anybody out there want to jump in?
So as far as recruiting students, so what's been kind of the success that the approach that other schools have found to be useful as far as talking with them one-on-one, getting the group together? How have people found that to be successful in the past?
Yeah, so the typical kind of model that we've seen success with is have adults nominate those students, then your team to sit with that list a little bit and put it together like, all right, what's the best combination of students? Do we need to maybe shorten that list, or is that list not diverse enough? Maybe we need to come back and say, hey, there's whole groups we've missed, like, hey, maybe we have no football players on this team. How are we going to impact that portion of the population? Or we got none of the kids that play hacky sack at lunch on this team, or we've got none of our video gamers or isolated students. So your adults mull over that list, and then I think the best way to do it is then bring them to a meeting where you pitch it to them and say, hey, you all were nominated. We're starting this program. We're really excited about it. It's about, youth empowerment and leadership and making a positive change here at the school, and pitch it hard there, and then send them home with those parent permission forms. And then even after that, you may have to, we like to talk about wooing the students into this program, that to keep that diversity, you don't want to just throw it out to them and then, whoever signs up. But if you have some of those key people that haven't come back with permission forms, you want to kind of chase them down and be like, hey, we really, really, really want you at least just show up to the training. You're going to get out of class, and if you're bribing them with food or whatnot, to pitch it that way and say, just show up to the training and see if you like it. Give it a chance for one day, and then if after that they decide they don't want to be a part of it, that's all right. But sometimes we have to woo them into it, and usually the training has the power to really captivate them. That they might walk in thinking, no, this isn't my thing, and by the end of the day, they're really engaged and feeling empowered and bought in. So hopefully that answers your question. Any other thoughts or concerns, questions? Either people can't find the mute button, or I answered all the questions. Yeah.
Can you, do we have posters or any kind of resources we're going to be using for this, as far as like, I don't know, like you were talking about the shock and awe thing, or the shock and, you know what I'm saying? And usually the posters, are we going to be using any of those?
Yeah, so usually we recommend that peer leader teams make their own posters. So, we do have the wheel that can go up, but we don't provide like posters with already stock messaging, because we find that to be less effective than the stuff your school makes. So it's really about your adult advisor team supporting and partnering with the peer leaders as they generate ideas, and then running it through that hope help strength lens, that when they're creating posters or any kind of campaign, that it's got to be hope, help, strength based, and that you all put your foot down. If at the end it's coming out kind of sad, shocking, or traumatic, you just put a stop to it. But we like to try and curve that initially by saying, hey, how could we turn that a little bit to make it more about strength, for it to be more hopeful? And then you're using your faces, your messages, the culture of your kids to make those kinds of activities. Yeah, so the only thing that we provide really is the wheel, and you can put that on anything you want. And we do have some posters for the wheel, but everything else will come and be generated by your team. That sound good?
Sounds great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great question. Anyone else want to jump in?
Dan,
Yeah.
we're going to make sure that every school leaves with a campaign idea this year. Even our booster schools are all going to have a campaign ready to go, as our new schools are. And because we're going to show people the website, the kids the website, we're going to ask them ahead to figure out which of the things they want to do, and we're going to work out the campaign with them at the training so that they'll have one idea ready to go.
Great. Sounds good. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we can close. Let me just say, I will try and package in a relatively short amount of time a recording of this webinar along with a PDF of the slides that I've shown. Judy, would you like me to include a startup toolkit in that, or do you all have that resource that you've adapted in particular ways that you've already shared with them?
Dan, if you, why don't you shoot that to us, and we'll see if we're missing anything or if things have changed at all, but that would be helpful. Okay.
Great. So I'll send that through Judy and Jennifer. Judy and Jennifer, do you want to close out with saying anything everyone who's on the call needs to know?
We will be scheduling a webinar with the ILP team I'm going to see what works for most people. I'd like to have one pretty soon, just so that you all can get your minds wrapped around the timeline, and as you digest everything you've heard today, usually people come up with more questions as they start trying to pick their peer leader teams and that kind of thing. So I'd like to have that pretty soon, because you'll need a few weeks to get your peer leader teams pulled together and permission forms returned, that kind of thing. So we need you to start that pretty soon. So I will be sending out an inquiry to everybody about having a webinar just with the ILP team.
All right. Sounds great. Well, we're really excited about you all coming on board and starting Sources of Strength, keeping it going strong up there in Idaho. And we will try to support you along with the Idaho Lives Project as best we can, but please reach out to either them or us anytime you have a question or need to be pointed in the direction of a resource. And we hope the best for you all, and are really excited about the impact you're going to make when partnered with your students. So thank you so much for your commitment to this.
Thanks for your
thank
time.
you. That was well done.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye-bye.